I was standing at the altar as his best man, holding the rings, watching the woman I had secretly loved for 6 years walk toward another man in a white dress, and I told myself I was finally at peace with it. I wasn't. And in about 4 minutes, neither would anyone else in that room. Hi, my beautiful family. Thank you for sticking around with me through our trying times. I really appreciate your love and support. We're finally back again to give you many more beautiful stories. If you're already hooked in for today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. My name is Ethan Calloway. And I need to tell you something before the story goes any further. Something I'm not particularly proud of, but something I think you deserve to know from the start, because without it, nothing else that happened that day makes any sense. I was in love with the bride. Had been for 6 years. Her name is Naomi. Naomi Reeves, soon to be Naomi Bridges, if the next 4 hours went according to plan. And she was, without question, the most complicated person I had ever loved. Not complicated the way people say it when they mean difficult. Complicated the way a song is complicated. Layered. Full of things you only catch the second or third time, with a melody that gets inside you and refuses to leave even when you desperately wish it would. We'd been best friends since college. University of Michigan, sophomore year, a shared creative writing elective that neither of us needed for our majors, but both of us showed up to every single week anyway. She studied communications. I was in architecture. We had absolutely no business becoming as close as we did. But that's the thing about real connection. It doesn't ask for your permission. It just shows up and rearranges your furniture. By junior year, she was my closest friend. By senior year, I was quietly, devastatingly in love with her. I never said anything. That's important. I carried it the way you carry a stone in your shoe. Not enough to stop walking, just enough to make every step a little harder than it should be. And then, 2.5 years ago, something happened between us that I had buried so deep I'd almost convinced myself it was a dream. But we'll get to that. First, the wedding morning. The venue was called the Whitmore, a converted farmhouse estate about 30 miles outside Columbus, Ohio, all exposed timber beams and string lights and walls of glass looking out over rolling hills that had turned gold and rust with the October season. It was exactly the kind of place Naomi would have chosen. She had always had this gift for finding beauty in old, worn things. She once spent an entire afternoon photographing a collapsed barn. She made me see it too. Actually see it, the way light fell through broken slats, the way decay had its own kind of grace. That was Naomi. I was in the groom's suite by 8:30. His name was Brandon Bridges. That's the groom, my best friend since high school. Good-looking guy, built like someone who took care of himself, with the easy confidence of a man who had never really been told no by the world. I'd known Brandon since we were 15, which is long enough to know both the best and worst of someone and choose to stick around anyway. Brandon was a good man. I want to be clear about that, because what I'm about to tell you is complicated, and it's easy to make him a villain, and he wasn't. He was a good man who was about to marry a woman who was keeping something from him. Something she'd kept from both of us, in different ways. He was standing in front of the mirror in his tuxedo, and I remember thinking he looked genuinely happy. The unguarded kind, not performed happiness, not relief, but the real thing. His eyes were bright. He kept exhaling slowly, like he was trying to contain something. "You nervous?" I asked him. He laughed. Terrified. But the good kind, you know. Like standing at the top of a really great ski slope. I nodded and smiled and handed him his boutonniere and said nothing about the fact that my chest felt like someone had parked a car on it. Because here's the thing I haven't told you yet. 3 weeks before this wedding, Naomi came to my apartment at 11 o'clock at night. She was crying. Not the delicate kind, the ugly, heaving, mascara everywhere kind that meant something had actually fractured inside her. I'd sat her down on my couch and made her tea and waited. And then she told me she wasn't sure she loved Brandon. And then she told me she'd never stopped thinking about what happened between us. And then she kissed me. And God help me, I kissed her back. Before I go any further, I want to ask you something, and I genuinely mean this. If someone you loved came to you 3 weeks before their wedding and told you they had feelings for you, what would you do? Would you say something? Or would you let them go? Tell me in the comments. Because I've asked myself that question every single day since, and I still don't have a clean answer. We pulled apart after a moment. She pressed her forehead against mine. Her hands were shaking. "Ethan," she whispered. "I know," I said. "I don't know what I'm doing." "I know that too." She left an hour later. And in the morning, she sent me a single text. "I love him. I'm going through with it. Please be there." And because I was a fool, because I was her fool specifically, I said yes. So there I was. Best man at the wedding of the woman I loved, to the man who was my oldest friend. Standing in a groom's suite that smelled like cedar and cologne, watching Brandon Bridges straighten his tie in the mirror and glow with a happiness built on a foundation I now knew had a crack running straight through it. And I hadn't decided yet what I was going to do about it. The ceremony was scheduled for 11 o'clock. By 10:45, every seat in the Whitmore's main hall was filled. 200 people. Family, colleagues, college friends, distant relatives who'd flown in from places like Portland and Atlanta and Glasgow. The string quartet was playing something soft and classical that echoed off the timber ceiling. White roses and eucalyptus lined every pew. The light coming through the glass walls was the color of warm honey. It was genuinely one of the most beautiful things I had ever seen. I stood at the front, beside Brandon, slightly behind him and to the right. Best man position. I had the rings in the inside pocket of my jacket. I could feel them there, small, heavier than they should have been, pressing against my chest like an accusation. Brandon leaned slightly toward me without turning his head. "She's going to look incredible," he murmured. "She always does," I said. And I meant it. I meant it more than he knew. The music shifted. The doors at the far end of the hall opened. And Naomi walked in. She was on her father's arm, moving slowly, the way brides do, like they're giving the moment permission to exist fully before it passes. Her dress was ivory, simple, no excess ornamentation, which was exactly her. She'd never needed decoration. Her hair was up, a few dark curls loose at her temples. She was holding white garden roses. Her eyes were moving forward toward the altar, and they were, I want to find another word for this, but I can't, they were wet. She was crying already. I told myself it was joy. I told myself that's what brides do. And then her eyes found mine. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. Just a flicker, her gaze crossing the front of the room, catching on me before moving to Brandon. But in those 2 seconds, I saw something that was not joy. It was not the simple, uncomplicated happiness of a woman arriving at the altar of her own choosing. It was a question. She was asking me something with her eyes that she didn't have the words for. Or maybe she had the words and was terrified of them. Either way, the question was there, naked and trembling in her expression for exactly 2 seconds, and then she looked at Brandon and the smile returned, and her father kissed her cheek and placed her hand in Brandon's, and the ceremony began. The officiant was a family friend, a warm, round-faced man named Pastor Gene who clearly loved weddings the way some people love weather. He began with a few words about love and commitment and the courage it takes to choose someone, and the room was completely, reverently still. I stared at the floor. I was running calculations in my head that no best man should ever be running. The weight of the rings in my pocket. The weight of what Naomi had said to me 3 weeks ago. The weight of what I had said back, or hadn't said, which is its own kind of statement. I love him. I'm going through with it. She'd made her choice. She'd been clear. My job, the only decent, honorable thing left for me to do, was to stand here and hold these rings and let her have the life she'd chosen. That was the plan. And then Pastor Gene said something that broke the plan entirely. "Before we proceed to the vows," he said, smiling at the congregation, "in the tradition of this ceremony, I'll ask the classic question. If anyone present knows of any reason why these two should not be joined in marriage, speak now or forever hold your peace." He said it the way officiants always say it, a formality, punctuation, a beat of theatrical pause before moving on. No one ever actually speaks. Everyone knows that. It's a ritual placeholder, a moment designed to be filled with comfortable silence and gentle laughter. The silence came, and stretched, and I felt every single person in that room breathing. And I opened my mouth. I do. My voice came out steadier than I expected. Quiet, but in that silence it carried like a stone dropped in still water. The ripple was immediate. 200 heads turned. Brandon went rigid beside me. Pastor Jean blinked, his smile frozen in place like a photograph of a smile rather than the real thing. Naomi's face. I will never forget Naomi's face in that moment. She turned to look at me slowly, the way you turn toward something you're not sure is real. Her roses trembled in her grip. "Ethan," Brandon said. Low. A warning and a question at once. I looked at him. My oldest friend. The man I'd known since we were 15 years old. And I felt the full, crushing weight of what I was doing. And I did it anyway. "I'm sorry, Brandon," I said. "But there's something you need to know before this goes any further." The room had the quality of a held breath. 200 people collectively forgetting how to exhale. Brandon turned to face me fully. His expression had moved through surprise and landed somewhere harder. A controlled, jaw-tight composure that I recognized. It was his courtroom face. He was a corporate litigator. Brandon. He'd learned how to go very still when threatened. "Whatever this is," he said, his voice barely above a murmur, "this is not the time or the place, Ethan." "I know," I said. "I know it isn't. And I'm sorry." "Then don't." "I have to." Naomi stepped forward. She put her hand on my arm. Gripped it, actually, her fingers pressing hard into my sleeve. Her eyes were wide and dark and terrified. "Ethan, please," she whispered. "Please don't do this." And here's the thing. Here's the moment I replay more than any other. Standing there with her hand on my arm, her eyes begging me, a room full of people watching, Brandon's face going from stone to something more fragile beneath the surface, I genuinely wavered. I thought, maybe this is not mine to say. Maybe she tells him herself, later, honestly, and they work it out or they don't, but it's between them. Maybe me standing here is not justice. Maybe it's just jealousy dressed up in noble clothes. I thought all of that in about 4 seconds. And then I thought about Brandon. About the ski slope metaphor he'd used that morning. About how he'd glowed with the uncomplicated happiness of a man who believed, completely, wholly, in the ground beneath his feet. He deserved to know it wasn't solid. Even if telling him cost me everything. 3 weeks ago, I said, loud enough now for the front rows to hear, Naomi came to my apartment. "Ethan," her voice cracked. "She told me she wasn't sure she was in love with you, Brandon. She told me she had feelings for me. And then she kissed me." The silence shattered. Not loudly. It was more like the sound a window makes a full second after something hits it. A delayed fracture spreading in every direction at once. Someone in the third row gasped. A woman near the back said, "Oh my God," clear enough to be heard across the hall. Brandon didn't move. Didn't speak. His eyes went to Naomi. And Naomi, to her credit, to her absolute credit, did not deny it. She closed her eyes. One tear moved down her cheek, slow and deliberate, and she let it fall without wiping it away. "Brandon," she whispered. He took a single step back. Just one. But it was a step that contained a universe of meaning. A physical rewriting of the distance between them. "Is it true?" She opened her eyes. Yes. The word hit the room like a closing door. What happened next was both chaotic and strangely quiet, the way disasters often are in their first minutes. Pastor Jean, to his absolute credit, said, "Let's take a brief recess," in the most diplomatically devastated voice I've ever heard, and began gently ushering people toward the foyer with the help of the wedding coordinator, a sharp-eyed woman named Donna who had clearly dealt with worse and was already on her radio. Brandon walked out through a side door without a word. Naomi stood at the altar alone for a moment, her bouquet at her side, looking at the empty space where he'd been. Then she looked at me. Her expression was beyond anger. It was something quieter and more devastating than anger. Hurt, yes, but also something that looked almost like relief, which frightened me more than anything. I followed her when she moved. I don't know why, some instinct, The same one that had made me speak in the first place. She pushed through a door at the side of the hall that led into a small antechamber, a narrow, wood-paneled room with a bench along one wall and a window overlooking the estate's garden, used probably for musicians or caterers. She sat down on the bench. I stood in the doorway. "Close the door," she said. I closed it. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Outside, muffled through the walls, I could hear the sound of 200 people processing what they'd just witnessed, the low hum of shock passing through a crowd like electricity through a wire. "Why?" she finally said. Not accusatory. Genuinely asking. Because he deserved to know. You could have told him privately. You could have told me to tell him. You could have. She stopped. Pressed her fingers to her lips. Regrouped. You chose to do it there. In front of everyone. On his wedding day. Why? I leaned against the wall and looked at the ceiling and gave her the honest answer. Because I knew if I didn't do it there, I wouldn't do it at all. Because you were about to stand at that altar and say words that weren't true, and I was going to stand next to you and watch, and then spend the rest of my life being your best friend while knowing what I knew. And I couldn't. She stared at me. That's selfish, Ethan. Yeah, I said. It is. I know it is. You humiliated him. I know. You humiliated me. I know. I'm sorry. Naomi, I am genuinely, deeply sorry for the way I did it. I'm not sorry that I did it. She looked at her bouquet, turned it in her hands slowly, like she was examining it for damage. So what now? She asked. What do you think happens now? I had no answer for that. I sat down on the bench beside her, not close, a careful distance, and we sat there together in that narrow room while the sound of her unmade wedding filtered through the walls around us. This is the part one wants you to sit with, and I mean this genuinely. Have you ever done something that was simultaneously the most honest and the most destructive thing you'd ever done? Where right and wrong were completely tangled together? I'd love to know. Leave it in the comments. Because sitting in that room, I felt both things fully and at the same time, and I'm not sure I'll ever fully untangle them. We sat in that room for close to an hour. At some point, the wedding coordinator knocked softly and told us that most guests had been guided to the reception hall where the catering staff had quietly begun serving drinks, the universal solution to social catastrophe. Brandon had not come back inside. His car was gone from the parking lot. Naomi absorbed this information without expression. Then she set her bouquet down on the bench beside her and said, "Can I tell you something I've never told anyone?" "Always," I said. She looked at the window, at the garden beyond it, the October light going golden across the grass. "I've known for 8 months," she said, "that I wasn't ready. That something wasn't right. I waited. Not because of you specifically. I mean, yes, eventually because of you, but before that it was just this quiet thing. This low hum underneath everything that I kept painting over. Brandon is. He's wonderful, Ethan. He's genuinely a good person and he loves me and he was so certain, so solid, and I kept thinking that if I stayed close enough to that certainty it would become mine too. But it didn't. No. It didn't." She paused. "You know when I knew for sure? 4 months ago. We were at his parents' house for dinner. His mother was showing me wedding photos from her own wedding, 1987, this big album with the sticky plastic pages. And there was a photo of her and his father just after they'd exchanged rings, and she's looking at the camera but he's looking at her. Just completely, unguardedly looking at her. And I started crying. Because it was beautiful, I said. Because I realized I wanted someone to look at me like that. And I didn't know if Brandon did. And I didn't know if I'd know what to do with it even if he did." She finally turned to look at me directly. And then I realized who I thought about when I imagined someone looking at me that way. The room got very quiet. "Naomi." "Don't," she said. "Don't say it carefully. Don't manage it. Just, I need you to be real with me for 1 minute." I looked at her. 13 years of friendship. 6 years of loving her and filing it away. 3 weeks of a kiss that I'd replayed approximately 9,000 times. "I have been in love with you," I said, "since junior year. Since the night you read your short story in class, The one about your grandmother and the lemon tree. And I sat 3 seats away from you and thought, that's it. That's the person. And I have spent 6 years being your best friend and meaning it completely and also carrying that the whole time. She didn't look away. Why didn't you ever say anything? Because you never indicated. I indicated constantly, Ethan. Her voice cracked on the last syllable. I didn't know how to say it directly. I kept waiting for you to. And when you didn't, I assumed I was wrong about what I felt. And then I met Brandon, and he was certain, and I thought, maybe this is what it's supposed to feel like. Maybe the quiet, steady, chosen kind of love is more real than the other kind. What other kind? She looked at me for a long moment. The terrifying kind. I felt something shift. Deep in my chest, somewhere structural. Like a load-bearing wall deciding whether to hold. We've wasted so much time, I said. Yes, she said quietly. We really have. Someone knocked on the door again. Softer this time. Naomi's mother. She came in quietly, looked at both of us, and sat down on a chair across from the bench with the measured composure of a woman who had seen enough of life not to be completely undone by this. She was a small, elegant woman named Ruth, with Naomi's same dark eyes. Brandon's gone, she said simply. He called me. He's hurting, but he's safe. He said he needs time. Naomi nodded. Ruth looked at me then, the long, steady look of a woman doing an assessment. I had the uncomfortable feeling of being read. Ethan, she said. How long? Long enough, I said. She made a small sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. I always thought so. She looked at her daughter. Your grandmother used to say, the love you run from is the love that's real. I never fully understood that until right now. Naomi let out a breath that had clearly been trapped in her for months. She leaned her head on her mother's shoulder, and Ruth put her arm around her, and I sat across from them and felt, for the first time all day, that I hadn't made a catastrophic mistake. Or maybe I had. But it was the right catastrophic mistake, if that's a category. Ruth left after a while, and it was just us again. The afternoon light was shifting. That October gold going amber, then soft. Outside the window the garden was quiet. Somewhere in the estate behind us, the remnants of a wedding reception were awkwardly, heroically continuing. My mother genuinely likes you, Naomi said. She has always liked you more than she liked Brandon. She just never said anything. Mothers know, I said. She laughed. Small, tired, real. What do we do, Ethan? Like practically. What do we actually do? I don't know. I think we probably have to let this day end first. That seems achievable. Then I think you have to figure out how you feel. Not about me, about yourself. About what you want. She looked at her hands. The engagement ring was still on her finger. She noticed me noticing it, and without drama, without ceremony, she slid it off and held it in her palm for a moment. I should give this back. Yeah, I said. You probably should. She closed her fingers around it. Ethan, thank you. For saying something. Even the way you said it, which was absolutely chaotic. I know. And deeply, epically ill-timed. I'm aware. I'm grateful. She looked at me. I couldn't have stopped it myself. I know, I said. That's why I did. She reached across and put her hand over mine. Just rested it there. And we sat in the amber light in that narrow room with the garden outside and the wreckage of a wedding around us, and it felt, strangely, inexplicably, like the beginning of something rather than the end. The next 2 weeks were the hardest of my life. And I want to be honest about that, because it would be easier and neater to tell you that exposing the truth felt like relief, like the right thing always does in stories. But real life doesn't move like that. Brandon called me on the Sunday, the day after the wedding. I picked up on the second ring. He didn't yell. That was the hardest part. Brandon didn't yell. I trusted you, he said. You were my best friend. My best man. And you stood in my apartment 3 weeks ago when I was talking about how excited I was to marry her. And you said nothing. You knew and you said nothing. Brandon. And then you chose to say it like that. In front of everyone. On the day. Not for me. Don't tell me it was for me. You did it for you. I didn't answer immediately, because there was enough truth in that to make arguing feel dishonest. Some of it was for you, I finally said. And some of it was selfish. Both things are true. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Did you love her the whole time we were together? The whole 2 years? The question sat in the air between us. Yes, I said. I did. He made a sound I'd never heard from him before. Not angry, something rawer than that. Something that sounded like a man discovering that the map he'd been using was wrong in a fundamental way. I don't want to talk to you again, he said. Not for a long time. I understand. I need you to know that what you did, even if Naomi and I weren't right for each other, the way you did it was not okay. You don't get to decide when and how someone's world falls apart. You're right, I said. I know you are. The line went quiet for a moment. I hope she makes you happy, he said finally. I genuinely do. Because if all of this happened and she doesn't, that's a tragedy I don't have the energy to deal with. He hung up. I sat in my apartment for a long time after that, not moving. The call had done something to me, opened up a chamber I hadn't fully reckoned with. Because as much as I believed what I'd done was necessary, Brandon was right about something. I had made a choice that wasn't entirely mine to make. I had walked into his wedding and rewritten the ending without giving anyone else a vote. And the cost of that was sitting in my chest like a stone. Naomi and I didn't speak for 5 days after the wedding. She needed space, and I gave it to her, or tried to. I'd pick up my phone a dozen times a day and set it back down. I'd draft messages and delete them. I cleaned my apartment obsessively, which is what I do when my mind won't sit still. I rearranged my bookshelves by color, which achieved nothing except making it impossible to find anything. On the 5th day, I got a text from her. I talked to Brandon. He's okay. Sad, but okay. He said something I want to tell you in person. Can we meet? I stared at the message for probably 4 full minutes before typing back. Tell me now. A long pause. Then, he said, tell Ethan he always looked at you the way I looked at the camera. I read it 3 times. What does that mean? I typed. Remember the story I told you about his mother's wedding photo? The one where his father was looking at her while she looked at the camera. I remembered. Brandon said he noticed early on that when we were all together, you always looked at me the way his father looked at his mother. He said he thought about breaking up with me over it once. But he loved me, so he stayed. My throat tightened. He knew. He suspected. He chose to trust me anyway. And that was when it fully hit me, the complete weight of what had happened. Not just what I'd revealed at the altar, not just the spectacle of it, not just my own guilt and longing. The full architecture of it. 3 people, all carrying some version of the same secret. All trying to love well and failing in different directions. I sat on my kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet and cried. Not for long. Not dramatically. Just for a few minutes, the way you cry when you're finally allowed to. Then I got up, washed my face, and called Naomi. We met at a coffee place on 5th Street, the one we'd been going to since we were 23, with the mismatched chairs and the wall of old Polaroids and the owner who knew our orders without asking. Neutral ground. Familiar ground. She was there before me. Sitting at the corner table, both hands around a mug, no makeup, her hair down. She looked tired. She looked more like herself than she'd looked at any point during the past 6 months of wedding planning. I sat down across from her. The owner, Marco, set a black coffee in front of me without a word. Some things about the world remain reliable. You cried, she said immediately. How can you tell? You always get this, I don't know, this rawness around your eyes. Like the skin is a little thinner than usual. She tilted her head. What happened? Your text, I said. What Brandon said. She nodded slowly. He's a good man, I said. The best, she agreed. Just not the right one. And I'm. Don't finish that sentence as a question, she said. Not today. Okay, We drank our coffee. Outside, the Columbus Street moved at its regular pace, oblivious, indifferent, beautifully normal. "I've been thinking," Naomi said, "about the lemon tree. The short story. You remembered. I remember everything you've written. Every piece you've shared with me for 13 years. She looked at me steadily. "Why didn't you say that sooner? Any of it. The 6 years, why?" "Because," I said slowly, "I was afraid that if I said it and you didn't feel the same way, I'd lose you entirely. And having you as my best friend it was the most important thing in my life. Loving you quietly seemed safer than losing you loudly. So you chose safety." "I chose cowardice dressed as safety, yeah." A small smile. "We really have wasted so much time." "Obscene amounts," I agreed. She set her mug down, looked at the table, then looked at me. "I need to do this right," she said. "I need to actually go slow. Mourn the relationship I ended. Let Brandon heal. Let myself breathe. I can't just walk out of one thing and into another. I'm not asking you to. But. No but. That's all." She searched my face. "You'd wait. I've been waiting 6 years. I'm genuinely very good at it." She laughed, that full, unself-conscious laugh, and it moved through me like sunlight through a window. Like something opening. "Ethan Calloway," she said. "Naomi Reeves," I said back. "You are the most infuriating, reckless, emotionally delayed." "I know. And loyal and brave and—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. Her eyes went bright. "You're my best friend. And you're mine. Let's not ruin it." "We won't." She reached across the table and held out her hand. Open, palm up. Not romantic. Not a grand gesture. Just a hand. The hand of someone who was choosing carefully, deliberately, with full knowledge of the cost. I put mine in it. And that was enough. For that day, it was completely enough. Now, before the final act, I want to ask you one last thing, and I mean this from the bottom of my chaotic, messy, well-intentioned heart. Is there someone in your life right now that you've been loving quietly from a safe distance? Someone you've been waiting to tell? Drop their first initial in the comments. Just one letter. You don't have to explain. I think you know what I'm getting at. 3 months passed. I know that might feel like a skip, like the story is rushing past the hard part. But I want to be honest with you. Those 3 months were mostly ordinary. Quietly ordinary in the way that healing always is. Naomi had therapy. I had my architecture projects and my too-clean apartment and the patience I'd been building for 6 years. We texted. We called. We met at Marco's on Thursday mornings, because Thursday mornings had always been ours, a ritual from college that had survived every life change thrown at it. We didn't rush. We'd already paid for rushing. Paid for it in 200 shocked faces and a wedding that ended before it began. We were done rushing. Brandon and I, that took longer. 6 weeks of silence and then a short, careful text from him. "Hope you're well." 3 words. I stared at them for 20 minutes and then typed back. "You too." "I'm sorry." He replied, "I know." And that was, for a while, all there was. But it was something. It was the first stone in a very long bridge. He'd started seeing someone I heard through mutual friends. A woman he'd met at a work event. I hoped it was good. I genuinely did. December came. The city went cold and gray and then startlingly beautiful with Christmas lights, the way Columbus does every year. Practical about everything until the holidays, when it suddenly remembers how to be extravagant. On the 15th of December, Naomi asked me to come with her to a gallery opening. A friend of hers was showing photography, the documentary kind, images from rural communities across the Midwest. We went on a Wednesday evening. The gallery was warm, wine-lit, full of quiet conversation and the specific comfortable silence that art spaces invite. We moved through the room slowly, side by side, talking about the photographs in low voices. She'd slip her hand into the crook of my arm when we paused at an image we both found striking, then let it go again when we moved on, easy, unself-conscious, like it was the most natural thing in the world. And then we stopped in front of a photograph near the back of the gallery. It was a black and white image. An elderly couple sitting on a porch, somewhere rural, a weathered farmhouse behind them. They weren't looking at the camera. The woman was looking out at something off-frame. The man was looking at her. The way you look at something you can't quite believe you get to keep. I heard Naomi's breath change. Just slightly. A quiet intake. "That's it," she said softly. "That's the one." "Yeah," I said. She turned and looked up at me. And I was already looking at her. She saw it immediately. The directness of it, the completely unguarded quality of it. And something in her face shifted, settled, like water finding its level. Like she was recognizing something she'd been looking for. "Hi," she said. "Hi," I said back. "I'm ready," she said. 2 words. I'd been waiting 6 years for 2 words. And there they were, offered in a warm gallery in December, in front of a photograph of an old man looking at the woman he loved. I reached up and tucked one of those loose curls behind her ear. Gently, carefully, the way you handle something you've been afraid to touch in case it disappears. "Yeah," I said. "Yeah," she said. I kissed her. Not like the kiss 3 weeks before her wedding. That kiss had been desperate, freighted with grief and confusion and the weight of everything unsaid. This one was completely different. This one was quiet. Certain. The kind of kiss that isn't asking a question but answering one. When we pulled back, she was smiling. That full-body smile, the one that takes over her entire face. "You took long enough," she said. "You have absolutely no ground to stand on with that statement," I said. She laughed. Took my hand. We stood there a little longer in front of that photograph in the warm light of the gallery. "No. I promised you a plot twist. And here it is." For days after the gallery, I was in my apartment. A Saturday morning, coffee made, architecture drawings spread across my desk, when my phone rang. Number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't pick up. "Is this Ethan Calloway?" "Yes." "This is Derek Holt." I went completely still. Derek Holt. Not Brandon Bridges. Derek Holt. A name from a different chapter, a different story, or so I'd thought. "I think we need to talk," he said. "I don't know who you are," I said carefully. "Yes, you do," he said. "You just don't know you know me yet." A pause. 3 weeks before Naomi's wedding, he said slowly. "She didn't just come to see you." My coffee went cold on the desk. "She came to see me first," he said. "She and we'd been friends. A long time ago. Before Brandon. Before you were fully in the picture. And she came to me to ask me something." "What did she ask you?" "She asked me whether I thought she should tell the man she actually loved how she felt before she married someone else." Silence. "And what did you say?" My voice was very quiet. I said yes. Absolutely yes. I said if you love someone you should say it before it's too late. A pause. "And then she went to you. And I gather something happened. She kissed you, you kissed her back, and then she sent you a text saying she was going through with the wedding." "Yeah," I said. "Because she was scared," he said. "She's been scared of you for years, Calloway. Of how big it felt. Of how much she had to lose if it went wrong." I sat down slowly on my desk chair. "Why are you calling me?" I asked. "Because Naomi doesn't know I'm doing this. And she'd probably kill me if she knew." A short, wry laugh. "But I've known her a long time. And I know when she's happy. And apparently, from everything I've heard, she's been smiling since December 15th. "How do you know the date?" "She told me about the gallery. She didn't say much else, but she didn't need to. I know her face in her voice." I was quiet for a moment. "Why are you really calling?" I asked. The line was quiet for several seconds. And when he spoke again, his voice was different. Lower, less performance, more honesty. "Because I spent 3 years not saying something to someone I loved. And I waited too long. And she married someone else and moved to Portland. And I still think about it every single day." Another pause. "I called you because I wanted to make sure you knew, whatever it cost you to stand up at that altar, whatever friendships it fractured, whatever mess you made, it was worth it. You did the right thing." I couldn't speak for a moment. Thank you, I finally said. Take care of her, Calloway. I intend to. The line went dead. I sat there for a long time. My coffee was cold. The drawings on my desk sat unfinished. Outside, Columbus was doing its winter thing. Gray sky, bare trees, the city moving at its quiet Saturday pace. And I thought about Brandon, who had known and chosen to love anyway. And Derek, who had waited too long and carried it still. And Naomi, who had been brave enough to ask the question and terrified enough to run from the answer. And me, coward turned something else, standing at an altar in a borrowed suit with rings in my pocket and love in my chest, and finally, no more silence left in me. I picked up my phone and called Naomi. She picked up on the second ring. Hey, she said. The warmth in her voice was immediate, unguarded, the voice of someone who's stopped bracing. Hey, I said. I just want you to know something. Yeah. I'm not scared anymore. A beat. Then, softly. Neither am I. Good, I said. That's good. And outside my window, implausibly, it began to snow. The first snow of the year, falling soft and unhurried over the city, covering everything in that particular, forgiving white that makes the world look like it's been given a second chance. Which I suppose it had. And so here we are, the end of the story. Or maybe the beginning of a different one. I want to leave you with this. Naomi and I got it wrong for 6 years. Brandon got hurt in the process. Derek carries his own grief from his own silence. None of us handled it perfectly. But we all, eventually, chose truth over comfort. And I believe with everything in me that truth is always worth the cost. Even when the bill is high. Even when people get hurt. Even when you have to stand at an altar in front of 200 people and open your mouth when everyone expects silence. If this story moved you, if any part of it felt familiar, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you've been carrying a quiet love in a safe place for too long, maybe today's the day you stop. Thank you for watching.